8.
The Radio Wammo Breakfast.
Talking politics with Phil Goff.
Yes, the leader of the Labour Party joining us this morning. Morning to you, Phil.
Good morning, Wammo.
Now, before we get into some local politics, I thought we should touch on the situation over there in Egypt and some criticism this morning coming from some New Zealanders living in Egypt that they're not receiving the required help from the New Zealand government. Do you have any advice on that?
Yeah, I've heard that feedback, that people feel that they're being told to get out of Egypt, but they're having trouble doing that, and they feel that there isn't the assistance they'd like to see from their government. And I guess pointing to the fact that the Australians have organised a charter flight on Qantas to bring their nationals out. John Key will have been getting advice on this. I'm not sure quite why we've approached it in a different way, but we've made it very clear that New Zealanders shouldn't be there. We hope that the violence doesn't get worse, but there is a potential that it does, and if it does, people could be at risk there. So I think that we need to look seriously at how we can cooperate either with some other friendly countries to help get our people out, or to look at sending one of the 757s up. But John Key will have more information on that, and it's for him really to explain why they're holding back at the moment.
I mean, is it just simply that we're not really resourced to cope with these sort of situations?
Well, we are. We've got two 757s that Labor acquired when we were in government. They're both can carry extensive numbers of people, probably enough people to meet the demand of New Zealanders to get out. But alternatively, when I was Foreign Minister, we'd look at whether we could work with the Australians or the Brits or the Americans to piggyback on the facilities that they have. I think the most important thing is to make sure that Kiwis over there are getting advice and are getting all the consular assistance that we can provide.
Well, good news just through from Al Jazeera saying that the Egypt army won't use violence against citizens staging protests against the president there. So I suppose that's some good news coming through.
Well, I hope they're right. I'm not sure how they'd know, but I mean, the Egyptian military hold the key to the future of Egypt. They've always been central in the political sphere, but they also, I mean, they will want to think about their place in Egypt and their place in history. And so far they've shown real restraint. They're well regarded by the people. The protesters have fraternised with the soldiers on the tanks, and that's a good sign because nobody wants to see a bloodbath. That would serve nobody's purposes.
Okay, Phil, we're back here. Election 2011 is all go, and you're out of the blocks with the number one policy that's knocked it over the line for me. I don't think you need to say anything else for the whole entire year, because you've announced that you will Monday-ise Waitangi and Anzac Day should you get in government, and that really is enough.
Well, what I've said, and I want to make sure people understand that absolutely right, we would keep the celebration of Waitangi Day and of Anzac Day on the dates on which they fall. But what we'd say to New Zealanders is that shouldn't deprive you of the day off that you would normally get in honour of those particular dates. So we'd basically do what the Australians do. Anzac Day would still be celebrated on the 25th. But if it falls on a Sunday, you'd get the Monday off in lieu. And I don't think that's too much to ask. If you look at the figures, New Zealanders are one of the hardest working people in the developed world. We work long hours. Those statutory holidays are important days, days for quality time with family, etc. How can we afford it only 5 years out of every 7 and apparently can't afford it on, 2 years out of the 7? I think John Key's really just looking for excuses when he says, how would we decide which day to pay statutory rates on and so on. Those problems are easily resolved. I think we should commit in principle 11 statutory holidays each year and a day off, even if we keep the commemoration on the date on which the day recognises.
And then we can start working on a brand new holiday between Queen's Birthday and Labour Day. That would be nice.
It's a long period, isn't it? I think we all go through the winter waiting for a long weekend and don't get it for a long period of time. Yeah. But there you go.
Can we just clarify how that's going to happen? Because it's currently a private member's bill, so that can be drawn any time. That can be drawn before the election. But let's say it's not drawn before the election, and it doesn't get drawn, say, in the first year. Are you still going to make it happen?
Oh, yeah, look, I think there's a commitment from Labor for that, and I think that the National Party would find it very hard to vote against that. Even if John Key wants to. I've talked to a number of National MPs, and they are quite supportive of the idea. I think that would have cross-party support in the House. The nightmare that John Key has is instructing his members in the House not to vote for it. We should vote for it. It'll be 4 or 5 years before it actually happens when one of those 2 days falls on the weekend again. But let's prepare for it now, and let's make provision for that in the future.
Okay, and the other thing I want to know is how are you going to pay for some of these spending promises, like the tax cuts that you've announced, but also reversing some of the funding that's been removed from early childhood education. How is this stuff going to be paid for?
Yeah, well, it can't be paid for all at once. I've sat through 15 budget rounds as a minister. I know the realities of fiscal constraints, but I also know that politics is about priorities, and we're going to change some of those priorities. Why do I think we should reverse the cuts to early childhood education? Because what you're putting at risk is the ability of some kids to get quality early childhood education because their parents can't afford it, and the costs involved with that, the failure in the education system because you don't get a good start, and then failure in the workforce when you leave school, those costs are far higher than the costs of investing and making sure that every child gets a good start. And some things will have to wait, There are things, capital investments in the Defence Force, putting new missiles on the frigates. That can wait. I'm sorry, might be desirable, but there are better expenditure priorities than the $875 million that would cost.
Sure, but is this back of the envelope stuff? I mean, where are you getting these hard figures from about how you can pay for it?
Yeah, well, it's interesting, isn't it? The National Party this year is spending $2.5 billion, which is the cost of tax cuts for the top 10% who get the lion's share. Nobody ever asks where the money comes from. Actually, they're borrowing for it. They're borrowing to pay for tax cuts for the highest paid people in this country. And what I've said, we won't borrow, we won't push up GST, and unlike John Key, I'll keep my promise on that. How do you pay for it? Well, I've set out 3 areas that are good for starters. One is we're losing billions of dollars a year in tax dodges. That's what the tax working group told us. They've told us some of the ways to stop that, like ring-fencing losses, that you offset your income tax that you should be paying against losses that you deliberately incur on speculative investment.
Right.
That should go. Secondly, the people at the top that got, look, there are 700 people in New Zealand that earn more than $1 million a year, and they took home between $1,000 and $3,000 or $4,000 extra dollars a week. In Australia, they'd be paying higher tax rates. I think everybody's got to pay their fair share. And thirdly, and perhaps most importantly, what it's about is growing New Zealand, growing our economy. And I set out in that speech, not much covered in the media, the various ways that I think that we can grow our economy, to grow our revenue, to grow jobs, and to grow people's incomes. That's absolutely essential.
So you say more income tax from a growing economy?
Well, yeah, as long as we've got the worst recession in the building industry in 45 years. That means that people are swarming out of New Zealand in the building trades. Houses aren't getting built. All the jobs that are created through that aren't happening. More people are unemployed and paying no tax and having to be supported. You've got to get your economy moving, and this government has shown that it's got no plan for it.
Phil Goff, thanks very much for your time.
Thanks, Wammo.
Cheers.
Catch you later.
See ya. Leader of the Labor Party, Phil Goff, there with us. Here's Tim Guy.